Hello and welcome to this webinar organized by UNITAR, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and Smarter Change, a strategic partner of UNITAR and the United Nations. We welcome you again to a space where we aim to discuss a little from the perspective of sustainable development, how the fourth industrial revolution, and particularly the digital industrial revolution and manufacturing per se, can indeed help us improve the competitiveness of countries, the ability to generate specialized employment, and to fight poverty. It's a big endeavor, but we have several experts that we are very thankful for. Particularly, I would like to mention from the beginning the support of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, who is a sister agency or sister entity within the United Nations sister entity of UNITAR, and also of Smarter Change, which is a corporation that actually helps manufacturing giants or manufacturing entities to improve the way they go about in their manufacturing processes, always from a sustainable development point of view and trying to leverage technology in the best possible way. So with that short introduction and recognizing that we have participants from 21 countries, which we thank you for, I would like to begin now switching to a presentation. Sebastian, please. Very good. So to give you an overview of what has happened so far with the pandemic, so we can have these deliberations from the point of view of the coronavirus and how it affects us, and hopefully we will be able to dwell on perhaps how manufacturing can look after the COVID pandemic. So in the map that you see in front of you, there are 216 countries and territories that have been infected by the COVID pandemic. And if you go to the next and you see the number of cases, we want to compare what was happening, at least from our perspective here in Geneva, Switzerland, at the middle of March, 15 March, you see the numbers there to the left, 169 cases, 6,513 people dead because of the coronavirus, to the end of June. So in 3.5 months, we went from 169,000 cases to more than 10 million cases, which is rather sad, especially because if you look at the number of deaths as of the 29th of June, 500,000 people have passed away because of this virus. You will see also the numbers under per country. And if you compare the one in the yellow circle, the United States of America went from less than 4,000 cases to 2.5 million cases. And then Brazil and Russia, as you can see, also highlighted, unfortunately, show a great incidence of this virus. In the next slide, you will see, just to paint an overview, the cumulative number of cases. And starting in late March, all April and May, and unfortunately, the outlook is that June will be the same. The pandemic continues to wreak havoc around the world, and this exponential growth is still seen in the graph to the left. To the right, you see the new cases per day, as reported by our brothers and sisters, our colleagues at the WHO. Great admiration for them, really heroes, in addition to all the health professionals, of course. They do have the authoritative data. And yesterday, unfortunately, reported are 189,000 cases in one day. And it's very sad, I was saying, because we thought that the pandemic was actually diminishing. It is not diminishing. And if you go to certain regions, it's actually not even reaching a peak. Next. Here you have simply a comparison of the coronavirus with other viruses and pandemics and epidemics that we have had in the past. But if you go to the left, you will see that the coronavirus has a reproduction rate of 1.5 to 2 times the flu, that 17% of cases are severe as requiring oxygen, but not necessarily intubation or respirators. And 5% of those cases indeed are critical. So that's what I meant. They require ventilation proper in an ICU, an intensive care unit. The mortality rate is 4 to 5% as estimated for WHO. Next. If you go to the countries that are mostly affected, the United States unfortunately continues to lead the trend, but Russia, Brazil, the United Kingdom, Spain are still with a great degree of incidence. Next. This graph is really shocking. It shows us that from a public health crisis, we evolve into a economic crisis and a social crisis, of course, behind. Everything is intertwined. Here you have the numbers from all of the major stock exchanges in the last 2 months, and I'm sure that when we get the numbers for June, it will be exactly the same. But in March, April, and May, you can see that around 30% of the value of the stock exchange, in some stock exchanges is even higher, has plummeted. It has been lost. Next, you will see that the forecast, in this case from the International Monetary Fund, the chief economist, Dr. Geeta Gopinath, is really not rosy. And it's very harsh, but it's very real. I'm a former governor to the World Bank and to the International Monetary Fund myself, and I respect the technical stature that the IMF will have. And they are forecasting that the so-called great lockdown of 2020 that we are living through will have an impact in real GDP growth of 3.5 to minus 4% in the negative year-on-year percentages. And if you compare what is happening this year and that decrease of the global economy with what happened in 2009 in the middle of the global financial crisis, you can compare those two numbers. It was not even 1%, it was 0.1%, all this hit that we took in 2008, 2009. So this is of different proportions. And indeed, it's the forecast in most cases, if not all, for global GDP now going country by country is recession. As you know, technically, to be in recession, you have to have 3 consecutive quarters of decrease, negative growth. But in this case, even though we don't have 3 in the data, we do know what is happening. So Dr. Gopinath has said that the Great Lockdown will result in the worst recession since the Great Depression of the 1929 and the 30s. Next. The recovery, and we have to remain optimistic, and at the UN we share this, is that once a vaccine is identified, distributed, and vaccination campaigns are implemented globally, in 2021, God willing, we will be growing back again, and the rebound will be 5.8% of the global GDP. You see there the red area basically illustrating that after the harsh decrease in the global economy, we will be growing again. Next. Now, at UNITAR, we are very proud to have the opportunity to teach government officials around the world, to train government officials around the world on public policy and the like, anything related to public administration. And we are supported and join forces with the regional commissions at ECE that will be taking the floor very soon. But if you go to the essence of public policy, there is something behind in any virtuous public policy implementation that implies coordination. So you read to the left from the perspective of the United Nations that we believe interagency coordination at the national level and harmonization at the regional and global level must become a priority. Why do we say that? Because what we see, what our secretariat in New York sees, what the WHO sees, is that unfortunately it's taking too long to coordinate the type of public policy that will allow us to survive well this pandemic. One example that you have seen all over the news is how countries implemented the lockdown, some of them very early and aggressively, and some of them very late and imperfectly. And then we have some results. Of course, here we don't take any sides or issue any judgment, but the news speak for themselves. So in this slide, you also see that all of us at the United Nations wish to encourage every government, and several government officials are listening to this webinar, which is quite an honor for us, We encourage everyone in the public sector and also in the private sector and as members of civil society to remember the priority that the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development is. The global fight against poverty must remain a priority and must become the basis and reason for all public policy. If you go to the next slide, you are going to see that in starting to think what will be this world of ours beyond the coronavirus and after the coronavirus, even before a vaccine is identified and distributed, we need to understand that there will be a new normal, that the next normal is different from the previous one. And there you see in these words that we postulate here, just to illustrate the idea, all of them starting with an R. We have shown the resolve all over the world of how we can indeed fight this pandemic. It's in human nature to do that. And that comes with resilience. Resilience as understood as the ability to go back to normal, even if the new normal is very different from the previous one. Just to use an example in passing, the future of work, the way we will work is indeed very different. We have demonstrated in most of the cases and in most of the countries that working from home is indeed doable, but the vast majority of the real economy cannot exercise the luxury that we somehow have in developed nations to develop intellectually and to implement actions intellectually remotely from our homes using ICTs, information and communication technologies. In some of the cases, in most of the cases of the developing world, that resilience should be shown because people go out to the street in this new normal to make a living. And then the return itself, we, all of us as United Nations system, really believe that we have to work on plans to go back to it at the national level, at the subnational level, at the local level, in the private sector, everywhere, in every single sector of the economy, health, education, industry program. We will get into manufacturing very soon. But the resolve, the resilience, and the return to that new normal are imperatives that we are following closely. And finally, in this slide, reimagination of how that new normal is going to be. And then indeed, the UN calls for reform. We have been calling for reform for a long time. And this is the time, at least in the public sector, that perhaps we can provide better accompaniment to member states in their quest for reform. Next is that resilience indeed is a priority for the states nationally, but also locally. And with this slide, I simply want to call your attention to the need to better understand the role of local governments and the local as a whole, not only the local government in its proper definition, but that everything in reality is local. The COVID fight has been done locally, case by case, person by person, hospital by hospital. So the United Nations has postulated that in this fight and the economic measures behind, from our perspective, $2.5 trillion are needed to address the economic recession caused by COVID-19. Our Secretary General issued a call and created a fund with the support of several member states. And we are very far from those 2.5 trillion, but we are moving slowly but surely to secure that funding that the developing world will need indeed to go back to that new normal after the COVID pandemic somehow decreases. Next. In social measures, the establishment of new public-private partnerships to provide social services to even the most excluded populations will be indeed a turning point in the post-COVID world. And here, let me start introducing the topic after, and of course, my colleague from ECE will be speaking in what's their experience, I'm sure, in engaging with industry and the private sector, because the Economic Commission for Europe indeed has a stellar case in its interaction with the private sector. Perhaps we at UNITAR a little less. But public-private partnerships indeed are one of the solutions ahead. And when we go to social measures, in addition to what you know, the social and physical distancing, production and educational facilities closures, the work from home measures and so on. Those has been some of the greatest challenges in facing the crisis, especially in the developing world. Perhaps in the globalized north, in the developed global north, is easier. Though when you go to least developed countries, is indeed difficult. Next. And here we get to the issue at hand on manufacturing and digital transformation from the point of view of crisis management and resilience. We postulate this question that you see on the screen. What are the key points of manufacturing and digital transformation? And then, of course, it goes without saying that digital transformation is the integration of digital technology in all areas of business, resulting in fundamental changes to how business operate and how they deliver value to customers. It is a combination of traditional manufacturing processes enhanced with new advanced and advancing technologies, working together to drive manufacturing forward and address inefficiencies in the current sectors. This comes from Forbes magazine that we respect, but it's simply an idea that captures how digital transformation can assist manufacturing in supporting sustainable development. Because indeed, digital transformation can help improve manufacturing processes, especially in developing nations, by mitigating disruptions, making manufacturing sectors more competitive, and to leverage the ability to create employment and better employment, providing the ability to adapt rapidly to all these disruptions, including the one caused by COVID, and perhaps shifting the supply chain to a new geography without huge cost or risk implications. Mr. De Gori, that we highly respect, after a career of 35 years at Procter & Gamble, is now the Chief Supply Officer at the second level after the CEO at this humongous corporation called Kimberly-Clark. What an impressive career. I am sure that he's going to talk exactly on that, on how supply chain indeed can help the new normal after COVID, and how technology can be leveraged when the moment comes, or as we speak. And then on Industry 4.0, digitalization, I'm not going to talk too much because indeed we are not the experts. ECE has been dealing more with this issue on how innovation processes can actually make a difference. So to conclude this initial presentation, just to put the COVID in perspective and to introduce the topic, let me just say that we indeed agree with several of the leaders, the thought leaders in this realm, including the speakers today, and Smarter Chain, the company that is supporting us on these first 5 keys to digital transformation. First, the creation of a digital thread at the start of an innovation process. Then, the need to find manufacturing partners that are digitally native and enable the choice, agility, and resilience a company needs to do this. Number 3, in ensuring that the company has the right digital tools to manage its supply chain, especially in the developing world, because the divide is very big. And from our perspective in Europe, we are very privileged, as I said before, but the Sustainable Development Goals are to be implemented everywhere, especially in the developing nations. So I'm sure that Mr. Johnson, when the moment comes, and I will introduce him and his name soon a little better with his title and so on, but he will help us understand how these innovative processes make a difference. Finally, we need to embrace the digital twin, automation, robotics, additive manufacturing, and artificial intelligence as technology building blocks, and not necessarily as things that take employment away. And I'm sure that Mr. De Gori will talk about it. He had explained to me what he's going to postulate. So allow me to finish my introduction there on behalf of UNITAR, and again, thanking all the speakers. And if I may, allow me to introduce now Ms. Anders Johnson, the Chief of the Innovative Policies Development Section at ECE, the Economic Cooperation and Trade Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Media, dear speakers, dear participants. It's an honor to be here, and many thanks for the invitation. I think one of the few upsides of the COVID pandemic and the restriction measures that we've taken is that we very quickly gotten very used to these kinds of webinars and to online platform. Of course, sometimes a pity that it takes a pandemic for us to coax us in this direction, but at any rate, it's gotten off very quickly. We've gotten used to teleworking, and I think this will change a little bit the way we also work in the future. I wanted to take a step back from the COVID pandemic itself and talk a little bit more generally about what some people call the fourth industrial revolution. There are a few other terms out there that are used more or less interchangeably. To make a few general comments about that and talk a little bit about the impact on manufacturing, not going into too many details because we have experts and we have a panel discussion afterwards. Then talk about some of the broader trends outside of manufacturing for our society as a whole, and then some of the implications and the policy outlook, especially for I'm thinking about ECE countries with economies in transition, but also more generally for sustainable development and for economic development. And then a few things that we're doing on the ECE side to support this topic, which is gaining more and more prominence. So the concept of the fourth industrial revolution is basically a way to think about the way the rapid changes, positive changes mostly in technology, will change our lives, how we create value, how we interact in societies. And it's driven by technological advancement that some people are saying are blurring the physical, biological, and the economic sphere. But in the term revolution is deliberate. It's nestling this development within the context of the first, which was moving from agriculture to manufacturing, the second, which was using steam power and electricity, the third, which was driven by information technology and globalization. And we're expecting, or many people are expecting, a similar shift now. And I think we should keep in mind that it was the third industrial revolution that has lifted billions out of poverty. It has also created problems. But I think in general, the challenge or the onus is on us to manage this transition well, both in terms of public policy, in terms of cooperation among countries, and also, of course, in terms of the private sector. I think so far we've seen, even before the COVID pandemic, that despite the hype around the fourth industrial revolution, which has been around for over a decade now, there's no hockey stick, neither in terms of the economic effects, nor in terms of actual use of technology. It's growing, but it's not growing as fast as many people thought. And this illustrates a general trend that we have when we think about these changes. We tend to overestimate the impact of technology and other changes in the short term and underestimate it in the long. We saw this in the dot-com bubble, enormous valuations of IT companies. Then, of course, there was the crash, and after that, there was a more solid emergence of the value that we could create. Same with the railway, same way with electricity. It took 50 years before we actually saw it in the figures. Same with IT. About 5 years ago, I forget who it was, said that we see IT investment everywhere except in the productivity figures. It takes a while for these things to filter through. And we see this today as well. We've been predicting all kinds of good and bad scenarios about the potential of artificial intelligence, actually going back as far as the 50s. The future has always turned out to be different. Tesla, for instance, as many of you may know, Elon Musk came out, I think it was a year or two ago, and said 90% of the plans that he had for automation and robotization didn't actually pan out. But of course, it's the 10% at work that might make it all worth it. So we should keep in mind that we're not good at predicting these things. We have a long history of getting things wrong, from Keynes over the Luddites to Malthus and his dire predictions in the beginning of the 19th century. Rail travel, globalization. We simply don't know, and this is basically the crux that we have to deal with from the micro perspective of companies, but also from the macro perspective of what is the good policy response to this. Now, in terms of the impact on manufacturing, it's sure to be substantial. There's no question about that. But here again, we don't know exactly when, where, and how things will happen. And we also have to see this in the overall trend of changes in manufacturing. We've seen deindustrialization overall, especially in terms of employment, but radically higher productivity. And we've seen the service sector, at least the way we defined it when we set up GDP accounting system in the 20s, US Bureau of Economic Research, when the service sector was pretty small. It has been able to take up much of the slack, and of course many things that used to be manufacturing are now at least accounted for as services. The potential is enormous in things like smart autonomous systems, growing potential for machine learning and continuous improvement and automation, real-time constant communication among systems, many times without human interaction. Ubiquitous and low-cost connectivity through Internet of Things and Internet of Systems, and 3D printing, of course, gives us the possibility to transfer many physical things into services, reduce transport costs and the like. I think the largest potential, and I would submit this for the speakers to comment on, is the potential for efficiency gains pretty much everywhere in what we do, in monitoring systems, in checking quality, in supply chain management, in tracking what we do, and gradually ensuring productivity improvements across the board. And also, of course, the potential of robotization, not only manufacturing, but in things like nursing care is one of the big investments that Japan is doing now, driven by the fact that they simply don't have enough people to work. The awareness is high. If you look at company surveys, almost everyone is thinking about this. And just to pick up on Mr. Major's point, there's no simplistic robot in, worker out kind of dynamic going on here. It actually hasn't been, if you look carefully into the figures. In surveys of US companies, was the only one I was able to find, was that very few companies are actually expecting substantial net replacement of workers. The roles might change, and they might make some things more efficient, but they will also invest in other areas and will still require workers. And I think one of the most striking things that we have seen is that 5 years ago, there was a prediction that we're not going to need radiologists anymore. Now, 5 years down the line, it's pretty clear that that artificial intelligence is actually making radiologists much, much more productive. There's always a human element that you need. And these are the kinds of things that we need to gradually discover. So on my third point, I wanted to take a step back. It's important not only to look at the production side, it's important to look at the larger picture. And I would like to highlight 4 macro trends for your consideration that I think will be prominent over the next decades. One is the platform economy. Basically, the logic is very simple. There are so many physical things that we have. For instance, I bought a drilling machine just to drill one single hole. It costs 200 Swiss francs, about $200. If I had any possibility of just getting that drilling machine at the point, exactly at the point in time when I needed it, and using it, and robot could then pick it up and bring it somewhere else, I would do it. The reason I'm not doing it is because the transactions cost. Finding someone who has it, and transacting with that person, then the physical placement of those goods, all of that was simply too daunting. Now we have the possibility of platforms which can triangulate supply and demand, automate the transactions, create trust through rankings and what else we see. And I think we only scratched the surface on the potential of this. And of course, it's also important in terms of SDG 12, sustainable production and consumption. It gives us an outlook where we're able to consume more, which of course is important also mostly for the less fortunate people of the world, while using less resources. The other macro trend is servitization of the economy. Now, of course, services have grown quite a bit since we started GDP accounting. And I would expect this to continue. We digitize more and more. If you think about the simple fact that my cell phone, which costs less than $100, has, and I think I saw a list of about 30 different gadgets that we used to have, ranging from barometer to alarm clock to newspaper to a notebook where you take notes, not a computer. And this is just a few. I already have this in my pocket, and it's turned into a service. It's not physical things that I need to own anymore. And I would expect this trend to continue, and it's actually a pretty exciting development in that sense. The third macro trend is inclusion and democratization. Tyler Cowen talks about developing countries focusing on cell phones, not factories. Many of these technologies cost very little. Connectivity still might cost a little in a few places, but there's no reason not to expect that in the long term, many of these things will be, at least to the consumer, free or affordable for the majority of the population. So they will be able to access services that didn't exist or were incredibly expensive just a couple of decades ago. And the final trend is some economists call this saltation. This is basically, we've been talking for a long time about developing countries growing through what we call quantum leaps by taking the latest technology and not going through the intermediate stages. I think this potential has grown radically as many of the physical barriers will be able to overcome by turning things into services. And second, many of the problems that countries have had with things like legislation and business environment will become less important if you can transact through these kinds of platforms. So my fourth point is basically overall the speed and scope of change seems daunting, but we should be optimistic in general. We might be able to sustain the dynamic that has created a lot of wealth and lifted people out of poverty, which is of course not automatic. And we should always keep in mind that I have here in my hand, for less than $100, as I said, more computing power than the entire world had 50 years ago. So from a long-term perspective, this will be good. But to do that, we need to enable what we can broadly call innovation. Schumpeter called it creative destruction. Some people are calling it permissionless innovation, meaning innovation, even if you're not allowed to because of existing legacy regulations or because of habits and the like. And there will be many things that we have to deal with. Many jobs and activities will be obsolete, which is a problem in the short term. Of course, many of the harder jobs that we had a century ago, no one is sad that no one's picking up horse manure in the streets of New York anymore. But in the short term, they need to find other things to do, and it's far from clear where those jobs are going to come from, especially from the less skilled. It used to be the case that you could simply benefit from low wages to engage in labor-intensive manufacturing and then gather skills based on that and find niches. That seems to be, and I'd like to invite the speakers to comment on this, that seems to be less of a possibility. Probably countries are going to have to find ways to grow through what we now call services. And we also don't know what is going to work, and I won't go into this, but there are many examples of, for instance, autonomous vehicles having large problems overcoming the last 1% of technology that's needed to make them reliable. And there are many, many examples of this that simply were not expected, not even by someone like Elon Musk. So you see member states are discussing this with increasing fervor. Many of them are worried. There's a general worry about missing the boat. Many of them are resource dependent, which of course might not be a sustainable option. And I think more broadly, many of these countries are also struggling with several of these industrial revolutions at one single time. We might have parts of the economy that are still basically pre-first industrial revolution. And that's quite a bit to chew off. But I think the central edict that we should keep in mind is we need to make our economies more able to embrace broad experimentation, to find out what works and to find out what doesn't work. And this requires also rethinking about how we do governance. How can we permit more things? How can we adapt the rules of the games in a consistent manner? And this is very difficult because many of the rules that are in place are actually preventing innovation. One example is Graham Bell, the US Bell company, which had a monopoly on telecommunications, actually prevented the rise of touchtone phones, apart from rotary phones, which is the thing that you have to, by over 30 years, simply because the rules of the games didn't allow it, and they had, of course, a commercial interest in keeping things the way they are. So we don't like uncertainty, but I think in this case we have to find ways to embrace uncertainty and to enable experimentation. Most things will not work, but the things that do work, I think, will make the difference. So we at ECE, we're adapting to this imperative. We're supporting governments in their efforts as one of 5 regional commissions of the United Nations. We work quite a bit right now on the COVID response, and I can say more about that, but I'll keep this short, so to stick to the time slot. We're working quite a bit on innovation. We're doing national innovation reviews of country where we look at what we call the national innovation system. And we're trying to coax innovation policy to be seen from a broader perspective, not as something that's focused on research or maybe on sexy startups, but that's focusing on enabling and promoting experimentation everywhere. And a lot of the innovation that you see actually takes place in areas like childcare or in construction that many people don't think is innovation, but it is to us, and I think it's important. On the transport side, we're preparing the rules of the game for what might be a potential autonomous vehicle revolution. We're working on smart, sustainable cities, especially important now, as we might actually see a de-urbanization trend that's triggered by COVID for better or for worse. There's some very interesting things happening there. So finally, I'd just like to quote Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, who's still alive. I think he's over 100 by now. And a year ago, he says on artificial intelligence, if we do not start this effort soon, before long, we shall discover that we started too late. So it is important both for policymakers and for companies. And maybe we can see what's happening at COVID now and the responses to it, the need for more automated interaction, the radically increased public spending that will inevitably see to compensate for the losses when you simply shut down parts of the economy, where many, of course, poorer people work. But also an increased focus on resilience. What if this happens again? What if a much deadlier virus comes? What if some of the global warming predictions come true? We have to build much more resilient societies, and we should see this as an opportunity, both on the private sector side and the public sector side, to do this, maybe use this as an impetus. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Mr. Johnson. Indeed, a very holistic and comprehensive description that helped us a lot in the discussions that we are going to have on the Industrial Revolution. Quite important that you mentioned the need to strengthen the governance that we have ahead, and your thoughts are really deep and relevant for me. And finally, indeed, I believe that on artificial intelligence, yesterday is today, and tomorrow is ahead of us immediately. So we appreciate the support that always the ECE, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, has provided, not only to member states, but to sister agencies like ours. UNITAR is always very thankful by the opening that you as a regional commission give us. And your participation today shows indeed that we are one UN. And I simply wanted to say thank you. So that opening statement is very well received, and it has helped me a lot in introducing the conversation that comes ahead. And without further ado, I would like to now introduce two great friends of the United Nations, in particular of UNITAR. I have already mentioned Mr. Gori, but I would also like to introduce our colleague, Mr. Vasilis Karamallegos. Mr. Karamallegos is the co-founder and CEO of Smarter Chains with Mr. Gori, but more important than that, and I have the privilege of knowing him personally, he's an entrepreneur in digital platforms. We are going to learn a lot from both Gustavo and Vasilis. Now, without further ado, allow me to give first the floors to Mr. Gustavo Gori, Chief Supply Chain Officer of Kimberly-Clark Group, and also the co-founder with Mr. Karamalegos of Smarter Chains. Mr. Gori, the floor is yours. You are muted. Still muted. Thank you. Thank you, Gustavo.
Yes, I was muted centrally. Thank you so much, Alex, for introduction. And I'm very happy to be here today with all of you and sharing a bit of how we see the revolution happening, affecting us, and what we can do about it. Without further ado, and Vasilis and I will introduce a bit further later in the presentation. So let's move into the next slide, please.
Thank you.
I would like to start by asking everybody, which of the 3 C's lead the digital manufacturing transformation in your company? Is it your CEO? Is it your CPO? Or perhaps is COVID-19? I hope you have your answer in your mind. In my particular case, I would say COVID-19 is playing an amazing role in triggering, accelerating, and moving forward this revolution. It's helping us to think about digital in a different way. It's creating the stage for the next generation of operations. And it's really helping us to understand what are the things that we need to go for immediately. We will have the revolution in place in a more advanced stage, and a lot of the production and effects on production due to the pandemic will have been avoided or mitigated at least. My name is, can you move, Sebastian? My name is Gustavo Lopez Gori, Gustavo Gori. I am Venezuelan originally. I studied in the Universidad Simón Bolívar in Venezuela, and I joined P&G back in the year 1981. I dedicated 35 years of my life of this amazing institution where I did a lot of roles in the area of manufacturing and supply chain in general. Manufacturing, the core of my career, gave me the opportunity to see part of the second, the third revolution, and see the initial steps of the fourth revolution, which is simply amazing. In the P&G, in my P&G career, I had the opportunity to work in every region of the world and in many of, if not all of the categories where we compete. I had also the opportunity to create the work system that we use in manufacturing operations in Procter & Gamble that we sell out to other companies today. And I saw it from the genesis all the way to maturity. My last assignment in Procter & Gamble was the Global Vice President of Manufacturing, where I had the opportunity to create the next stage of manufacturing in P&G, which is actually the area of digital manufacturing. After leaving P&G in 2016, I joined Smarter Chains along with Vasilis Karamalegos, who's going to introduce himself in a couple of minutes, and another ex-P&G, Luigi Matrone. And we created the magic of Smarter Chains, which is a platform that will help manufacturers to accelerate their path forward into digital operations. Vasilis, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gus. Hello, everybody. I'm Vasilis. I'm CEO and founder of Smarter Chains. 14 years ago, I graduated Cranfield with a master's in logistics. Then I joined Procter as one of the top supply chain organizations in the world, where I spent 10 years of my life. And then I left in order to pursue my dream, which it was always to build a platform in which it can help companies accelerate the journey towards the fourth industrial revolution by accelerating and democratizing manufacturing expertise and knowledge, and the ability to scale the learnings across the organization in order to bring everybody to the same page the fastest, in order to make sure we can capitalize on the opportunities ahead. Of course, Gustavo joined us and he brought to Smarter Chains all the knowledge and experience around manufacturing and the history of manufacturing as well. Few things about me and how this is connecting to the journey we are at Smarter Chains. I grew up in a family of marine engineers. And all my life, I was listening to great stories about many great people that has helped us to move people and things with safety across the seas. If you can please change the slide. Thank you, Sebastian. So one of those marine industry great heroes like Henry Ford is for manufacturing, if I would make a parallel, is John Harrison. Harrison was one of the greatest Brits as voted by the British people. He ranked like 39th of those. He did something really fascinating that when we talk about any industrial revolution, he rarely is being mentioned, but he has been the cornerstone of even the first one. So next slide, please. Back in the 18th century, maritime navigation was very different from what we are experiencing right now. It was far of the life at sea was depending on guesstimates. So determining where you are, the distance or the direction was really far more of an art rather than a science. So of course, any type of a choppy sea was endangering and the crews and of course the things and the commerce that was to go from point A to point B. All the plans didn't really matter as the sea was the ruler of our destiny. Now, all these things changed when Harrison, which he was a clockmaker by profession, he set out to establish the longitude of a journey to almost half a degree. So in particular, he produced an astonishing set of discoveries that has led to the invention of what we now know as the maritime chronometer, which it caused a revolution in navigation as we can charter safely our plots. Health and safety for the crews was like a standard. And of course, the collateral benefit was that international trade flourished, setting the foundations for the first industrial revolution. The next slide, please. So nowadays, in 2020, we face a new set of navigational challenges and business continuity risks. And I will leave Gustavo to talk about the problem that we face nowadays.
The problem is in a few words, is very simple to understand. We manufacturing leaders face a proliferation of technologies and capabilities offerings that is so difficult to sort out from. So choosing the right one and why the right one fits really the use of my needs. As soon as I'm learning one technology, the new version of it comes in. And this proliferation of technologies and capabilities makes it very difficult for me to make a choice. In addition to that problem, I normally manage more than one operation. So how do I scale across my operation the use of those technologies in an effective way, delivering the real results that are required? How do I even do operation in platforms so I can really leverage in a given platform, the given technology that is fit for use in this situation? And more importantly, even, how do I manage the complexity of the organizational challenge by bringing those technologies to play in my operations system? To make it even worse, Sebastian, can you move on? To make it even more, this proliferation of solutions makes this decision-making so difficult that there is a species of like a paralysis in the operations and the leaders to make the right decisions on where to go to. Will you move on to the next one? This is the reason why Smarter Change created a platform that has three distinct and very important steps. We start at helping our clients, manufacturers, with the idea of understanding where we are, where you are. Well, that's what we call the prepare phase. In the prepare phase, we create a baseline of the operation and we help them understand their capabilities and their gaps so they can understand comparison points, leveraging points, reapplication points across their operations. That data is strategically important to get into a defined phase where we do a penetration, a further penetration of the operation to understand and identify use cases of value for the enterprise, identify investment size, identify what it takes in terms of resources, time and money and to connect them with potential solutions at the vendor level to define those strategies. Once the strategy is ready, we can move into the execute phase, where we translate the findings of the assessment translated into business case and business cases that could be scaled across the operation to create a master plan for execution and enterprise collaboration. Can we move to the next one, please? We have had the chance to work for the last 4 years or so with very, very important companies in terms of size. Most of our clients, we've been lucky enough to work with Fortune 500 companies, and we have done this methodology across the globe, as you see in the map. So across the globe, and with all the big players, Fortune 500, and literally we haven't even visited the plants because we do this remotely, which is another interesting aspect of this operation. Very frequently, can you move, Sebastian? Very frequently, we find our clients being in a difficult situation. As I explained before, the proliferation of technologies makes it difficult to decide. The changes of those technologies and new features created makes it very difficult. There's the need to scale, the organizational complexities, the cost of these solutions, the time it takes, the lack of understanding of how do I create a master plan. All of these problems are making a desirable move difficult for people, because there is no manufacturer that would not like to have better automation, better use of data, and better throughput and productivity in the world. There is no one that would say, no, I don't want to be more productive or operate way and move with data. So we find many times that the clients, they get conflicting priorities. They find themselves facing that either they're gonna close a quarter, or there is a quality issue, or there is a new initiative into the marketplace that they need to tackle. And the result of this is that they lower the priority to the digital journey work. This is the reason why in Smarter Change, together with EY, we went ahead and created a benchmarking study. And today we will share with you some of the results and the highlights of this benchmarking study, so you understand where the baseline of where the industry stands and what the best of the best are doing, so we can follow and accelerate the implementation. EY was a sponsor of this work, and as you know, EY is probably the largest operational consultancy in the world, with more than 4,000 contributors doing consultancy in the industry of operations. Can you move, Sebastian, to the next one? This is the methodology of the study. I will explain that, and then I will let Vasilis to explain the insights and a very important detail, which is how do we understand and steer the work that we do for manufacturing, digital manufacturing. The study included 50 plants across the globe, as you see in the map, which is about accounting 327 production lines, with a workforce representation of about 24,000 and almost 20,000 SKUs produced. We had the chance to interact and make part of the analysis or the inputs into the analysis about 500 manufacturing experts with the different type of people that you can see in the pie chart on the right side of the upper corner of the slide. And we collected in this effort about 333,000 data points. The industries that we cover are in the list on the left lower corner. That is a good representation of the CPG industry in general. Vasilis, why don't you take on and share with us the learnings?
Thanks, Gus. So I just want to echo the importance one more time of the study, as it was the first of its kind globally on the subject of Industry 4 or factory of the future. Now, if there is one number that I would really appreciate leaving this meeting to have in mind is that there is only a 10% of plants that they are actually have understood how to leverage all the new Industry 4 technologies at scale within their operations. So that's why, for the purpose of the study, we have named the 10% advanced plants and the 90% early stage plants. Now, to do the analysis, we have used smarter chains, scalable, platformized methodology in order to help the manufacturers to chart a path forward and, most importantly, to create a common language for the factory of the future that all manufacturers have used. In reality, we haven't done an amazing job for so many years of such an old and such an important industry of creating standards. And now, with the world of accelerating technologies, which we are working with more than 500 technologies only on manufacturing. So we all understand that the complexity that we face at all levels of the organization, from senior leadership down to the shop floor, is going to be huge. We really need to collaboratively start harmonizing and simplifying the way that we approach this. So from the smarter change perspective, as a marine navigator needs, in order to prepare the journey ahead, he needs to understand the strengths, the weaknesses, he needs to engage the organization on all the different pillars of capability. We have created, can you please move the slide? I'm sorry, yeah, thank you. We have created what we call the Smarter Change Factor of the Future 10 Dimensions Framework. We created a framework leveraging decades of experience in analyzing and optimizing operational excellence programs across different global industries, and of course our proprietary R&D over the last 4 years, combining deep engineering knowledge of all the different technologies and their functional applications in order to develop the first industry-wide measurement system to track the progress across the Industry 4 development. As Gustavo mentioned before, we've been working with some of the best supply chain. Actually, 25% of the top 25 supply chain companies in the world are our clients, though we know that the opportunity is not for the best of the best, because they do have the minds, the resources, and the talent to really navigate the complexity moving forward later. Our vision was always to be able to scale this down, as we call it, from the best to the rest, to the companies and enterprises that don't have the skills, the money, and even the understanding of what the future holds and how to navigate it. So those dimensions, they follow the application of digital and automation technologies to the conventional pillars of typical 40 years old operational excellence program. As said, we need to keep things as simple as possible in order to be able to efficiently navigate the complexity ahead. So by tracking the progress across these dimensions and understanding the different capabilities, both at the factory level, but also at the enterprise level, the leaders, they can identify the key areas of opportunity and be able to strategize at scale. Can you please move forward? So using this compass now, I will just take you through what are some of the key learnings that we had out of the study. Number one is leadership, and we couldn't stretch enough. Like in all things in life, both in government, politics, in business, in family life as well, they all start with a vision. So in the dimension of the factor of the future leadership, we measure the structures and policies that can help inspire, support, and accelerate the integration of new capabilities into the existing technology stack. So the majority of the plants, the participating plants to be more specific, they saw the lack of maturity in this dimension, although the advanced plants, they scored quite well. So a key takeaway here is that while all advanced plants are part of companies that they have an enterprise-wide Industry 4 strategy, only 1/3 of the early stage plants, they have this in place. Enterprise-wide, meaning they think about the future holistically as a company not as different islands of excellence or of isolation, if you like. Next slide, please. In the digital organization is how do we take the vision and we organize ourselves around it. So how do we create the structures and the policies that they can provide the agility in order to effectively go from design to a rollout of the effective digital strategy. So as shown on the right, in this dimension, we clearly differentiate advanced plans from the rest of the pack. Organizing for success is the key enabler of everything. Technology is just a tool. Mature operational excellence programs that the most advanced plants have, they really rely on the organizational problem-solving capability, which by its chance is also helping to adapt new technologies and being able to leverage them effectively. And again, in this dimension, the advanced plants are mostly at the top phase of their maturity in their company's operational excellence program, while the early stage plants, they are still moving at a slower pace for sure. In data-driven maintenance, we measure how we integrate different methods and systems to proactively manage the maintenance of our equipment based on data, not muscle. So here, while most advanced plants have created momentum in the dimension, most early stage plants are extensively apply reactive maintenance. They get a problem and they react to it. They cannot really leverage proactively interventions before something bad occurs and stop the production. A key takeaway here is that the advanced plants, they really invest in smart sensorization of the equipment. So being able to sense something that might happen that will disrupt the operations before it actually happens, while only a portion of the early stage plants are investing in this area. Next slide, please. In the dimension of automated data flow, we measure the effective integration of different IT systems and operational technology systems, the programs that they are actually running the machines on the shop floor. As you can see on the right, the industry is quite mature in this dimension. Of course, advanced plants are leading the pack, but really some early stage plants outperform even the lowest scoring advanced plants. A key takeaway here is the ever-growing understanding of the importance of connecting and correlating different things, and of course, connecting them in a way that we can stream them directly for analysis rather than having the different touches and the chaos we are currently facing in our operations. Both advanced and early stage plants are still not collecting the majority of data they produce. I'm sure you have heard a quote that data is the next oil. This is a reality in many things of human activity. Moreover, in manufacturing, while in manufacturing, we have been like the patriarchs of big data in terms of velocity, variety, and the volume of the data we're producing since the invention of the PLC on the 70s. Next slide, please. In the dimension of automated material flow, as it says, we measure the machinery and the systems that optimize and automate all things moving material and people around in the manufacturing facility. Most plants are on the lower end of the spectrum, as still forklifts is the undisputed king of our operations. So despite the adoption of automated vehicles, mostly from the advanced plants, automated material handling movements account only for a very small percentage of movements across the whole of the CPG industry, showing tremendous potential for the application of ever-growing technology on how we are moving things, which is the hardware piece of Industry 4. Robots, automated guided vehicles, which is a combination of multiple different technologies in order to really deliver the capabilities we need. Next slide, please. In digital-ready infrastructure is all things that we need to have in place to ensure we can run the operation safely. So first, we need to ensure the safety before we go and we invest in new things. As we know, the fear of new things is already big enough. We need to ensure we really have safety in all things, communication networks, cybersecurity tools, to ensure that the infrastructure is in place that is not serving the current state, but is going to be serving the plant's vision of the future. So currently, most of the advanced plants, they do have an industrial grade wireless network providing connectivity options to some or most of the assets throughout the plants, while only a third of the early stage plants, they can leverage any type of wireless connectivity in the facility. In the 360 factory visibility, we measure how do we eliminate silos by being able to horizontally combine data to drive speed in our decision-making processes. So while in this dimension, clearly the advanced plants are front runners, more than half of the advanced plants, they focus on the user friendliness of the interfaces and the flexible collaboration of the systems. Building the business cases is all about time, the time we spend on things, the time we spend on inputting data, processing data, analyzing data, reading reports. So most of the best, they focus on really minimizing the interface between the human and all things software and hardware to drive decision-making processes. Next slide, please. In intelligent quality, we measure the integration of sensors, software, and different, of course, quality techniques that can leverage real-time data to drive our quality control or quality assurance processes. In this dimension, a few of the advanced plants can manage to separate themselves from the top-scoring early-stage plant. CPG, of course, being a consumer-focused industry, as well being the industry that really supported all of us during the COVID challenging times, they have, of course, very high regard to all things quality. Now, still, huge potential of improvements by integrating more technologies, of course, and what do the best do best, they have replaced sample testing, meaning I go and I pick something and I just test it on the laboratory to ensure that the quality is to specifications, with real-time quality control and real-time quality release. So we minimize the touches across the production process of all things ensuring the product of quality is to the standards. Next slide, please. Tech-augmented workforce, something that we really consider very important and a real paradigm shift in the discussion of upskilling and reskilling all blue-collar employees, white-collar as well. Now, in this dimension, we measure the technologies that they can help employees in their task by augmenting their skill set and optimizing the workflows. Now, we see clearly that the advanced plants have really separated themselves from the rest of the pack, capitalizing on the lack of investment from early-stage plants in this dimension. Now, a key takeaway here is that the digitization of the work instructions across processes, how do I assemble a product, how do I change over the line, how do I conduct maintenance, is commonly adopted by early-stage plants, while still early-stage plants, they try to understand what is the area and the space for them to adopt it further. Next slide, please. Zero-touch production. In this dimension, we measure all things hardware and software that can eliminate human effort in all things production planning and execution. Now, in this dimension, we see the biggest concentration of plants in the 25 to 50 point area, driven by the automation which is embedded in the CPG industry. If we conduct the study in consumer electronics, for example, which by nature, the product is more complex, so far more manual intervention in the assembly process, we would have seen a completely different picture of this concentration. Now, a key takeaway here is that although the basic manufacturing execution systems are very much adopted by the industry, the real differentiating factor between the advanced plants and the early stage plants is the number of functionalities that they use in order to drive and convert raw materials into finished products. Next slide, please. So now, after doing a quick insight, one insight per dimension, I will pass it over to Gustavo to talk about what have been the key insights from the study of giving a real pragmatic view of the state of the industry in terms of the adoption of Industry 4 technologies. Gustavo, up to you.
Thank you, Vasilis. Yes, I will talk about the learnings, and I like to preamble the learnings with a comment about sustaining operations. Sustaining operations normally would require reliability, predictability, data-based decision-making, stability that can be proved along the time. That's the only way the industry can really deliver sustaining results in the impact of their operations into the enterprise, but also grant that we are in control in keeping ongoing sustainability of operations. It's extremely important to make that comment, because it can get lost in the total number of capabilities that we're talking about here. Every single one of those dimensions have been defined in a way that we can deliver the results required for the enterprise in terms of business and sustaining results on an ongoing basis. There are 6 key recommendations that I like to share with everybody here as a result of this study. The number 1 is the importance of nurturing the right leadership behaviors that gear manufacturing to a transformation. It's extremely important that we define the new profile of those leaders, and we understand how those leaders need to act, so they can create the second point of my list, which is a culture of continuous learning, a culture where people discover on their own and they develop and grow for a better and bigger impact in the production system. We also need to take seriously, out of the study very clearly, an opportunity. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but only 2% of the sample that we study is leveraging workforce augmentation technology solutions. So it's very important that we get into in this area seriously, so we can enable the workforce to tackle the challenge of data management and gets along the way with us as we develop better solutions for the operations. We need to also ensure that there is visibility at a wide spread of the total operation in a way that we can really leverage, collect, and deliver the savings that are called out of this effort. It has been said that the industry can go for about a 26% productivity gain out of digital technologies, and that is imagine that impact in the economy. Manufacturing is a big industry. It's an industry of about $14 to $15 trillion globally. It's about 16% of the global GDP. It employs about 10% of the workforce globally. And there is no reason why we are not growing to be even more impactful in the economy by employing 15% of the workforce, delivering a throughput that is beyond the 14, 15 trillion dollars, and that we cannot grow at a pace that really contributes to prosperity in a very significant way. The next one I cannot emphasize enough. It is the importance of, no, it's the same slide, Sebastian. I'm talking about investing in infrastructure and cybersecurity. It is a very important aspect of the industry that a lot of people are working, and the sample shows that people are working, but there is still a slow pace in many of the industry and companies that participated in the study, which if you extrapolate globally with the 10 million manufacturers that exist globally, you can see that there is really a vulnerability in this area industry-wide globally. The last one, which is not the least important, is really the most important one, is that we need to learn how to engage the organization in a way that productively the transformation will happen, in a way that really leverage everybody's capabilities, and we can really create an impact, socioeconomic impact in the industry and for society as a whole. So those are the key recommendations of this study. And for last, we, of course, we are more than ready to help whatever is your situation. If you are leading directly operations, if you are a manufacturing leader, or if you are related to in general operations, Servitization will be ready to support you and guide you in those decisions. And with this, I will say we move to questions and answers. If there is any question from people.
Indeed. Thank you very much to Ms. Gori and to my friend Vasilis and Gustavo. You did an excellent job in explaining why digital transformation indeed can add value in a different manner to industry and competitiveness. And I simply want, before we go to the questions and answers, and we have some interesting questions in the Q&A, I want to say two things from the perspective of the United Nations, of course. And if my colleague from ECE would like to add, he's always welcome. But number one, from the perspective of the Sustainable Development Goals, indeed, the fight against poverty requires the creation of wealth, that prosperity is there so it can be better shared. And if you try to create a correlation between manufacturing as a whole and the fight against poverty, you need to do perhaps two things. Number one, to better understand why such a humongous component of the global GDP, 10%, I have read, if I may say, Gustavo, close to 12% of the global GDP, perhaps you were being conservative, but whatever the percentage, is a humongous part of the global economy. And the other one is the number of employments created. And I wanted to ask Gustavo and Vasilis, as soon as I finish this comment, to comment on that as well. So, if the fight against poverty indeed requires the creation of prosperity and a better distribution of wealth, of course, manufacturing plays a role. And if manufacturing can improve its contribution to society through the use of digital means and innovation, of course, everyone, and that's part of the concept behind the fourth industrial revolution, everyone welcomes that. However, there is this dichotomy or this myth in terms of employment, that the advent of artificial intelligence, the advent of more innovative processes and automation itself will perhaps create a dent momentarily in global employment until people are retrained and then they actually are part of manufacturing again, but from a different perspective and with a different capacity. So can you tell us, from the perspective of the Sustainable Development Goals, from the perspective of manufacturing as part of the fourth industrial revolution and employment, how do you see this, Gustavo? Because you and I have had an interesting conversation in that sense, in which indeed this myth that some people have is not necessarily the case. Can you give us some comments, Gustavo?
Alex, this is such an important question. I really appreciate that you're asking it, because it's an important topic and it creates a lot of fear for what it could be something not to fear at all. In my opinion, and this is proven, okay, every revolution brings along some fear to the employment level. Every revolution has solved that with time. And for example, let's talk about automation. Let's talk about mass production. When mass production started, there was an amazing fear for losing jobs and in the industry overall. What happened? Okay, still today, there is people that are not producing a mass production. There are 10 million manufacturers, and only less than 1 million of them are operations that are more than 700 people per plant. So we're talking about operations that are still very small, and jobs continue to be there. So in the fourth industrial revolution, it's a little bit more difficult to understand the relationship, and there are a lot of good people creating this important discussion because it's logical to have the fear for two things. One, there is a myth of a belief that people will not learn technology. People will not be able to operate and be successful managing technology. So that's number one. Number two is that technology will replace people. Well, the Industrial Revolution will have a better impact on society and prosperity if it's taken really on a holistic approach, meaning we are not, technology is not about replacing people in certain operations. Repetitive work are replaced with technology. Technology is about generating throughput and margin improvement. So through margin improvement, the enterprise will be able to innovate more and grow more, fuel their own growth, and through productivity in general and throughput improvement, the enterprise will also be able to utilize the same resources for a bigger return. There are also another aspect that I should mention that is very important. New jobs are generating thanks to the digital trend. There are jobs that didn't exist before. And today there is a wave on requirements of new capabilities, new profile of people, and a lot of people will migrate to those roles. Somebody needs to create the technology. Somebody needs to produce the technology. Somebody needs to program the technology. Those are jobs that didn't exist before, and today we are proliferating in jobs like that. However, the concern of my people not being savvy on technology, and how do I get technologies into my operation and get them up to speed to be effective on this new world? Well, I have good news here. You don't need to have computer engineers running your lines. What you need to do is to help people to understand technology and how to leverage it. Like, for example, nothing stops you from having a tech augmented pair of glasses that you can read through your glass. You can read the instructions of the next step that you need to follow in your operation. That is not requiring you to be a genius in technology. It requires you to be understanding the use of the glass and following the steps for the activity, which you today need to train people on still. In other words, actually this type of technology, I'm sorry I'm taking too long on this one, but I think this is such a critical discussion. This type of technology will make sure that the production system happens on a steady and repetitive way, because you are enabling people to do the work by following specifically the instructions of the glasses in this particular case. But I can give you many cases of different technologies and how it enables people to do a better job. Companies that are replacing people with technology are failing with this approach, and they're bringing people back. I don't know if you heard about operations, total operations that went off, like light off operations, and months after that they had to bring people back. I'm not going to mention companies or anything like that. That's not the right thing to do. But it's the right thing to do is to understand that you can take technology the wrong way and they can bring other problems. But in any case, people will return to their jobs because the jobs are required. In many cases, productivity is being measured by only replacing people, which is a big error. Productivity is a combination of different vectors. What material savings you get, what optimization of throughput you get, what avoidance of problems with quality, what preventions are taking place in damaging the environment. Those type of things included in a bigger equation of productivity is what we are pursuing with data-based operations. And I stop here because I can talk about this for hours.
Indeed. And we know that, and we are privileged to have your experience and that of Vasilis. Let me read something that my team found, published is Global Commons, but it's copyrighted for free use. It's copyrighted by the IEOM Society International when they were doing the research. And I'll just read these few lines so as to put in perspective what we are discussing here. This is about Industry 4.0. It says, Industry 4.0 will address and create solutions for some of the challenges facing the world today, such as resource and energy efficiency, urban production and demographic change, and others. Industry 4.0 enables continuous resource productivity and efficiency gains to be delivered across the entire value network and for the whole of society. It allows work to be organized in a way that takes demographic change and social factors into account. Smart assistance systems release workers from having to perform routine tasks, enabling them to focus on creative, value-added activities. And I will add, out of my own humble experience in this area, to improve salaries. Because one of the greatest problems that we have in the fight against poverty is the quality of jobs and the quality of salaries behind. And I do know that manufacturing with 16%, 16 trillion of global output and 10 to 12% of the GDP has a humongous potential to increase the quality of those jobs. They are value added for society, and particularly the salaries behind. So with that, before I go to the questions that the audience have posed, I always open the floor for Mr. Johnson if he wants to add something, or for Vasilis if he wants to add something. Any comments from your side?
Thank you very much. I've been listening with rapt attention, and there are so many bits and pieces that I could drill into. But let me just take 1 minute to highlight a few points that stood out to me, and also relate to the introduction that I tried to give. I think one thing that's very clear is that there is broad uncertainty about what's going to work and not going to work. And I think some of these graphs show clearly what I had in mind when I talked about pilot purgatory. There are many things going on, but there are a few that are moving on to an advanced stage. So we're still both at the micro and the macro level looking at an extended process of finding out what works and what doesn't work. The second point I think to keep in mind is that technology is a tool. The challenge is not as much technology. There's a lot of technology out there, and costs are falling quickly. The challenge is, how do we actually use that technology well? And I think that's important to keep in mind. Then we face quite a bit of challenges in terms of, just to take one issue, data security, how we trade data, how we handle data, how we extract the value of data that the economists a couple of years ago called comprising about 60 to 80% of the potential value in the economy. And I think in the public policy discussion, especially, we're only in the starting stages of that. So there's a pretty substantial issue of public-private policy discussion, and also policy discussion among countries, that still needs to take place, and that international organizations, where they have a place to play. I liked also the intervention by Gustavo, that basically it's a myth that we're replacing people with robots, but there will be substantial changes, and we do need to start building skills both at the micro level of companies, and I think Gustavo gave a few good examples of that, and at the macro level. I think overall, so far, so good. We have de-industrialized, and we become much more productive. We've been able to find jobs, at least broadly, for most people. And in fact, many countries are facing employment shortages. So the dire predictions of the past have not panned out, but we're still facing a substantial process in the future to find out where jobs are going to come from and what works. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I thank you very much, Mr. Johnson, always for keeping it in a holistic approach. Excellent comments. So we have one question for each one of you, beginning with Vasilis, then to Gustavo, and then to Lars, if I may. So Marta is going to present the questions to each one of you, with Vasilis first. Marta, please.
Let's go to the questions of the audience. I would love to answer your first position about the article, and then I would love also to complement the good comment from Mr. Johnson on how do we use the technology. So firstly, let me take and say that we were always coming from the industry and always being able to try to find what would be the way to eliminate the losses, meaning that things that we can be doing better and more sustainably. Now, we do believe that for all the supply chains, and mainly for manufacturing, as it is the core of the whole supply chain, First, you become smart, and then you become sustainable. By becoming smart, we need to use digital and automation technologies to tackle our losses. Then we remove the waste. And by removing the waste, we will by definition optimize or even replace all repetitive work, which, as we all know, is not the most interesting thing for any human being to do. So by definition, by replacing it, we will need far more jobs that are far more skillful and far more interesting. So by creating more interesting work, we will by definition create more highest paid jobs, which by their turns, they're going to create even more work. Now, we are a digital native company working on the triangulation of mechanical engineering, which comes from the past, and software. I cannot find the people that I need for my company. I need to train them and skill them from the beginning. And this is true for many people and startups and companies out there. And this is going to be by definition our future. Now, complementing the comment from Mr. Johnson, it is true. It is how do we use the technology? So how do we roadmap the future that we see coming, starting from where we are into this future in a way that we can collaboratively align all the different stakeholders, government, industry, universities, public governance. In Smarter Change, we have started with this because we do believe that prosperity is collaborative. And if, as Rifkin said it, we move from capitalism to collaborative, and this is true. And platforms will be the place where this is going to happen. So going from the micro level of a factory, understanding the skills that they're going to need for the next 5 years, we can start easily rolling this up to the country, region, global level. But this would require tremendous amount of collaborative capabilities, which, to be very honest, we do not have currently. We would need to work together in order to build it. But we do have the thinking, we do have the tools, and we do have the willingness, both from the manufacturing, the political, and the entrepreneurship arena, to bring all this together. So I wouldn't like to say, because of course we're entrepreneurs, we're internal optimists, yeah, by definition, that's why we do what we do. But we do believe that we can map out the future in a way that we can connect everybody and build and reskill and upskill at all levels of society what is needed to support the new business models that are going to come our way. I don't believe in fear. We should not believe in fear. On the contrary, we do believe that there is tremendous amount of solutions that require us working together to really navigate the work and the path forward.
Indeed, very well put, Vasilis. Thank you. You are a deep thinker indeed. And society as a whole needs perhaps to do this analysis and to better understand the added value of the right manufacturing for sustainable development. So we have 3 questions, and Marta is going to present each one of them. The first for Mr. Gori, the second for Vasilis, and the last one for Mr. Johnson. Marta, please.
Many thanks to all the panelists for this very interesting discussion. The first question we have from the participants is to Mr. Vasilis Karamallegos. It says, what do you understand under digital safety and security? Does it only include cybersecurity risk? Mr. Vasilis, please.
Well, if we take it literally as it's being written, yes. But cybersecurity can come not only from human to software risk and from human to human risks as well. So there is multiple different pillars in which we can really approach it in order to come to define a holistic type of strategy in order to face it. Now, as far as the digital ready infrastructure is concerned on how we approach the work, we consider all things software to software, human to software, and human to human type of risk that can actually put in jeopardy the whole functioning of the whole production system that, of course, eventually is going to be fully dependent on zeros and ones. So the higher the risk of automation and the higher the adoption of automation, the more exposed we are going to be to an ever-growing threats of digital interventions and interruptions in the supply chain. So this is the price we are going to have to always be living in. I'll give you a small example. For example, a lot of our clients, they have stopped using Zoom. For us, Zoom, it is the key platform that we are using and has gone tremendously well over the period of COVID, as we all know. Now, most of my enterprise clients, they don't use it because it is not safe enough, although nobody had the cybersecurity aspect. So the notion of a risk becomes far more important than the actual actualization of a potential risk. A very human thing, but something that we really, from a government's point of view, we really need to embed it into our processes moving forward.
Many thanks. So the next question is addressed to Mr. Gustavo Gori. It starts with a statement. I agree that it's important to invest into digital infrastructure, but how can we put a business case on such investments? Calculation of ROIs are not always possible for digital transformation projects.
I have good news for the person asking the question. It's really the opposite. And this is what one of the things that the Smart Exchange does very well. We create, as I said, in the 3 steps, where we say prepare, define, and execute. In the prepare phase, just where you are and what interventions you could need to improve your operational capability in the area of digital. In the second step, we do a deep dive of where your opportunities are monetarily. So when we understand the multifaceted aspect of the savings that you could deliver by bringing an intervention, by integrating into a production system a solution, a technological solution, that we do that in a multi-vector way, meaning it's not one single variable justification. It's not people only, it's materials, it's efficiency, it's quality, it's sustainability. Is all of the equation of where the waste that you're producing is. And we run for every one of the interventions that will be in the roadmap that Smart Exchange will propose to an industry. There will be in-depth NPV interventions. We also strive for every intervention to be a payout, and if it's not, most likely will not be in the roadmap, but if we need it in the roadmap, it will be lumped together with another intervention for the roadmap to pay out. But every step of the way is intended to pay, and intended to pay in a multi-faceted analysis, not in a single variable analysis. It's very, very important that you think about that. There is also a point that I like to make that it might connect a little bit with the prior question, that the need for keeping high standards in safety, high standards in quality, high standards on production efficiencies, etc., is not replaced by technology. Technology is an enhancement, and the integration of technology is an enhancement for you to deliver that in a consistent way, in a repeatable way, in a steady way. So you can really leverage the resources you have in the production system overall. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Mr. Gustavo. So the last question is for Mr. Lars Anders. From your perspective, how could manufacturing global value chain be impacted by disruptions caused by COVID-19? And particularly, how would these disruptions affect foreign direct investment on low-income countries?
Thank you very much for the question. I can make a few remarks from my perspective, but it might also be interesting to have the other participants comment from a company perspective. I think overall the impact is not clear, but it will be substantial. Of course, one side that we heard about in the beginning are the health effects, and even those, I would say, are probably radically understated. There seems to be undercounting of many cases and deaths. Of course, in many cases, it's also difficult. There's a pretty large gray zone, and we also see other secondary effects in terms of other diseases and other afflictions not getting the same care as they otherwise would. So just from the health perspective, the impact is substantial. The economic effects might be even more substantial. We have to keep in mind that we have basically suspended many sectors of the economy, which are only reopening slowly, and we have radically slowed down demand and dynamics in other sectors. And it's very, very uncertain right now to see what the impact is. One thing that did surprise me was that the economic effects have seemed to be relatively similar across the board, regardless of the restrictiveness of lockdown measures. So countries like Sweden and Belarus that took a relatively liberal approach are actually looking at similar effects on the economy. So that just goes to show that we don't know. Specifically in terms of the short-term effects, I would expect them to be radical. I would expect basically the economy to go down to maintaining current operations. We've seen many supply chains been radically cut, not only because of restrictiveness measures, but because of falling global demand overall. I think we'll see a significant reduction in the long-term focus of investment. I would expect companies to try to basically sustain what they already have and not invest too much in the future in anything that is long term. I think we'll also see, and we've already seen it, a radical increase in public spending, which might lead to rent seeking, which might lead to additional incentives to keep things the way they are and inhibit innovation with the long-term perspective. We might see a radical increase in liabilities and social spending that might be hard to rein down, and an increasing level of indebtedness. And many countries of the world are already facing difficult levels of indebtedness, and in the long term, that will significantly hamper countries, especially developing countries' possibilities to deal with investing in the future and to deal with similar events. I think in the medium term, we'll also see radical changes, especially in sectors such as aviation, but we can also expect some the geopolitical playing ground to change. It might sound cynical, but in a way, we have suspended the EU treaties in terms of free movement of labor, free movement of goods, and also in terms of state aid. So we have to be very careful to see where this is playing out. We also see tensions between the US and China, and the rhetoric is getting pretty heated. So it is a challenge we're to live on. Specifically in terms of FDI, I would expect any risk on FDI, any long-term FDI, and any investment into especially developing countries, I would expect that to decline and companies to focus on basically maintaining what they already have, which of course is dangerous if you think in terms of long-term sustainable development. The stock markets have fallen a bit and then climbed a bit. They're definitely not in sync with what many people think about the short and medium-term prospects of the economy. We might see a crash there, which will also then dent foreign direct investment and investment overall. So it requires concerted action and public-private cooperation on a much larger scale than has been necessary so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One moment. Let me lower the volume here. Yeah. So we need to wrap up. We have run out of time, but it's always pleasant to see that a conversation is actually longer than expected because it's interesting and profound. And that's the case today. And before I wrap up very rapidly, and excuse me for insisting, but this is our role. And you have two United Nations entities here. The Sustainable Development Goals are this roadmap proposed at the end of 2015 to guide the world, and particularly governments, but also civil society, the private sector, and the like, on what must be done so we can, by the year 2030, which time passed very fast, it's already 2020, 5 years into the process, and so on. What must be done so we have a better world with better standard of living, with better education, better health, a better environmental approach to manage our planet, and so on and so forth, but with something at the core, which is the fight against poverty. This is what pains the world the most. 820 million as of December of last year in the preliminary numbers of the World Bank live with less than $2 a day. So whenever we have these discussions, we must remember that the Sustainable Development Goals indeed are perhaps an alternative for the whole of society and the whole of government to tackle this global fight to create a better world, and especially to reduce poverty. But the idea behind it is that to achieve what the Sustainable Development Goals postulate, everyone has a role. Everyone. This is not only the work of governments, it's not only the work of civil society, it's not only the work of the private sector, and many other entities of society or clusters of society that are important, media, education. You can think of all the things, the amalgamation that makes society actually work. So if you go to the private sector and if you understand the importance of manufacturing from the private sector point of view, and we mentioned the numbers before, and the capacity to create employment and employment of quality, then you understand how important this conversation is. Because most people, perhaps in developed nations, but I think globally, understand the concept of the fourth industrial revolution, sometimes superficially, sometimes a little more profoundly. But if someone understands the concept of fourth digital industrial revolution, and the digital side of it is indeed the manufacturing sector around the world, the people that actually work in industry. And here today, and now I wrap up, I am very happy to have heard from two people that actually know, because they are there. They are actually interacting with hundreds of companies. This is through Smarter Chains, of course. In listening to them, in telling them, this is how a digital transformation can help your company, yes, your bottom line, but also society as a whole. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation. And I must mention again the importance of having ECE, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, here with us, because you at ECE have the view of the whole. And you have the view of the whole and in what member states, government are doing to provide the right framework for the private sector and particular industry to thrive and to improve and to develop and to embrace digital technologies and digital transformation. So with that, I simply wanted to conclude on behalf of UNITAR, telling you that anything and everything that we can do to support a better understanding of the role of every component, every audience as part of the Sustainable Development Goals, we will always be pleased at UNITAR to do so and to organize this type of dialogue. And I thank the very many people that have joined us today. We know, we saw in the list that we have registered from 21 countries through our 21 training centers around the world, the CIFAL Global Network. And I must also thank the directors of the centers that UNITAR have in all continents for bringing several participants from their own localities. So with that, I thank you very much, Mr. Gori, for the time you have given us today. I thank you very much, Mr. Vasilis, my friend, if I use the first name, and Gustavo as well, for the time that you have given us, and especially for working in tandem. Excellent team you have. And last but not least, to Mr. Johnson, Lars, thank you so much for giving us a view of the whole in this holistic mind of yours. And with these comments, on behalf of UNITAR again, I thank everyone for participating today, and I declare this webinar adjourned. Thank you so much. I wish you a good day. Bye-bye.